All right. Okay. All right, so this week's talk is on rules. So the rules are probably one of the most important things I can teach you of any of these chalk talks, because you're going to get out on the water this spring and hopefully we'll be able to jump right into intense practices, aka you'll know the rules of the road. So it's the same with traffic laws with cars. I mean, they get kind of complicated, but they all boil down to 4 of them that I'm going to show you today. And a little background on the rules of sailing. There's about 68 rules and then like 4 appendices. You use them from remote control sailboats all the way to 100 footers, and they all apply across the board, so learning them now is going to be really nice. During all this, besides blank faces, if you don't get something, please raise your hand and slow me down, because I've done this a ton of times, so I sometimes miss the easy stuff, or the complicated stuff too. I don't know. Alright, so your general terms: port starboard, clear head, clear stern. All these are a couple of things we're going to go over right now, because you're going to need to know them for the rest of things. So I'll cover each one of these and you don't have to write them down here. Now these diagrams though that I'm going to show you would be really helpful. Okay, so port starboard. There's 2 tacks when you're sailing. There's one called starboard tack and there's one called port tack. Now, the starboard side of the boat, which I should cover, is right side of the boat is starboard, left side of the boat is called port. The way you remember that is port and left both have 4 letters, so use that. Now, how you know you're on starboard tack. Now, there's a couple ways. The ways that I like is if I'm sailing upwind, if I'm sitting on the starboard side of the boat, then I am on starboard tack, right here. Or you can think about it, if the wind hits the starboard side of the boat first, then you're on starboard tack.
Phil, do port and starboard change if you're facing backwards in the boat? Why don't you just use left and right?
Important. That's actually why we have to use port and starboard, because your crews sometimes switched around, blah, blah, blah. It's all relative towards the front of the boat. So if you're facing forward, you know what side is which. That's what we use. Now, downwind. With the wind coming from the top. And I'm going to ask one of you newbies. All right, newbies. Which one? Allison, what tack is this boat on? Tricky, right? Yep. So how you can kind of picture it in your head is, if all you got to do is turn a little bit and oh yeah, you see the wind's hitting the starboard side of the boat first, so you're on starboard tack. When you can also say the tack you're on is the opposite of what the boom is, aka if the boom is on the port side of the boat, then you are sailing on starboard tack. So the boom right here, the sails are on the port side of the boat, so you are sailing on starboard tack. You guys good with that? Cool. All right, next.
If you're sailing wing on wing.
Anyone? Taylor?
Well, which way? Like, which one?
She's saying, let's say, if here's your boat. Wing on wing for you newbies is we have 2 sails. The front one is called the jib and the back one is the main. If we put them on opposite sides when we're sailing directly with the wind, it's called wing on wing. So Liz's question is, what tack is this boat on? They're sailing wing on wing. What tack do you think? Good. Yeah, because the boom is on the port side of the boat. And once again, if you can kind of just picture in your head, all you got to do is rotate a little and it gets really easy again. When you're a skipper, especially team racing, you need to constantly be thinking, if it's not second nature yet, what tack am I on? And we'll get to that, because the most important rule of the game is if you're on port or starboard tack. All right, the next thing we're going to cover is overlap. So here's overlap. This is just a standard sailboat. You're looking at it from the top down. How we define overlap is if you had an imaginary line dotted down the side perpendicular to the center line of the boat, that is your definition of an overlap line. So if two boats are like this, they are overlapped because they sit next to each other like that. They're defined as overlapped if they intersect this perpendicular line with any part of the hull. That can be 2 inches of the back end of the boat, or it can be the entire boat. But what it comes down to is you use this rule the most when you're talking about marks, because we round marks dependent on overlap.
What happens to your overlap if the boats turn?
That's a good point. Oh, I'll leave that up actually. So Chris brings up what happens if a boat turns. Now, first we're going to start off with just one boat right here. And since we're looking from the top down, we got to think of those imaginary lines. And it's obviously, well, yeah, it's in there. Are these boats overlapped? Yes, okay. Definitely overlapped. Now, if this boat turns, and bear with me on this drawing here, but I'll do my best. Oh, crap. Okay, you have two situations right here, and this was hard to draw for me, but if you have two boats and they're sailing in the same direction, just straight like that, if he turns, all of a sudden that imaginary line isn't intersecting right as before. So what Chris is saying is if you have two boats like this, overlapped, not overlapped by just a very hair. When right here, you're totally overlapped. Turn up a little, and you can avoid being overlapped. And you use that to an advantage at times. Okay, so we covered overlap. Clear stern and clear head. Basically, clear head means you're not overlapped and you're in front. Clear stern means you're not overlapped and you're behind. Yeah. So, clear head, clear stern. The last general thing that I'm going to show you is windward boat and leeward boat. A windward boat is the one... Oh, thank you. If the wind is coming from this arrow, the windward boat is closer to the wind. The wind hits the windward boat first, and then there's leeward. The other thing I want to show you, and this will help make this will make more sense. If the wind is coming from right here, and you're just talking about one singular boat, the side closer to the wind is the windward side. Windward. And I hope you guys are enjoying my handwriting. Windward side, leeward side. The windward side is the side that the wind hits first. The leeward side is the low side. That's how I remember it. Low side, leeward side. So now if you kind of scale up the windward and leeward thing I just told you, that works with combinations of boats. You have your windward boat and your leeward boat. And we'll talk about why that's important. All right. You guys good? Questions? Anything? Kendall, I'm asking you the rest of the questions. All right, general concepts of rules. So let's say you're driving down the highway, you're going 80, and you're tailgating. That would be the definition of not keeping clear. That's trying to get too close to another boat, if you think about it like that. Keeping clear on the water, there's going to be times when you do not have the right of way, so you have to keep clear. That's it. Room and opportunity is actually one of the most important things I can teach you of any of these rules, and we'll talk about how it's important later. For you more experienced racers, room and opportunity does everything with team racing. You can do any move you want, but if you don't give the other person enough time to avoid you, then you're cheating, basically, and you'll get penalized every time. You can't just ram into someone and say, oh, I had the right of way, if they couldn't get out of the way. All right, first rule. When boats are on opposite tacks, a port boat shall keep clear of a starboard tack boat. Basically, starboard beats port any day of the week. Where did my little boats go? I'm going to draw it on the board, actually. Here are the sails. Wind's coming from the top. Evan, what tack is this boat on?
What tack? It's on port.
Starboard.
Starboard.
Think about it when you... don't worry. Okay, who has right of way in this situation?
Wait, will you just explain
Sure.
why it's on starboard tack?
It's on starboard tack because the wind is coming down and hitting the starboard side of the boat first. Or, if you want to remember it this way, the boom is on the port side of the boat. Or, if you're sitting here, which is the starboard side of the boat, if you're sitting on the high side and you're sitting on starboard, you're on starboard tack. Okay, who wins? Starboard, all day. Okay, now we talked about overlap before, right? So when boats are on the same tack and overlapped, the lured boat always has right of way. And the lured boat is the boat that's further away from the wind. So this guy, he has all the rights in the world right now. Now, if the windward boat wasn't paying attention and windward boat, leeward boat. If the windward boat comes down and hits, or isn't paying attention otherwise, he has to do a 720 in college racing. Which would mean he sails, does a circle, and has to do another full circle. So in doing that, if you get a penalty for breaking a rule like that, you're going from 2nd place to 10th to 15th. It's day and night. Doing penalty turns is the slowest thing in the world. So, leeward boat, windward boat. All right, let's flip it this way. Braden, who's windward boat, A or B? Okay.
I used to always remember it when that L comes before W in the alphabet, so leeward has to.
That works. All right. Who has right away? Raise your hand if you think you know. Or raise your hand for A as windward boat. Windward boat. If A is windward boat, raise your hand. Come on. If the wind hits this boat first, then it's windward. AKA, go to this. Right here we see windward boat is the boat that's closer to the wind. Shh. Windward boat is closer to the wind. So windward, leeward. So B has right of way. All right, so mind you, what the rule we just talked about, Rule 11, talks about when boats are overlapped and on the same tack. We're going to talk about some other situations. All right, so while tacking, this is Rule 13. This is a rule that I've gotten in trouble for. It's kind of an easy rule to break if you are pushing it. You have, what? No, not quite. Oh, I broke it. David, your mask. Oh, I hit the wrong one. Never mind. Okay. After a boat passes head to wind, she shall keep clear of other boats until she is on a close-hauled course. So that basically means when you tack, so I'm sailing right here, wind's coming from the door. I'm sailing in this direction. I'm head to wind right now. My sails are luffing. Right now I have no rights, no rights, no rights. Now my sails are full. Okay, now I have rights. This rule is important because there are close moments when you got to think, can I tack behind a boat or will I hit him? So we'll do this situation I'm talking about. You're sailing upwind. You're on starboard tack. You have all the rights in the world right now. Okay, you start to tack. And tacking for the new kids is upwind. We can't sail directly into the wind. So we have to sail this way to keep our sails full. And then this way and back and forth. If we just tried to sail like this, our sails would flap like a flag. You need to have something that fills them. So this rule says, and there's the wind just to tell you the center line. Okay, you have rights, you have rights, you have rights. No rights, no rights, no rights, no rights, no rights. Okay, now I have rights. And that's defined when your jib pops, they call it. So for the advanced people, this is a moment when if you're behind a boat, let's say you're like this. There's going to be moments where you say, oh, I can tack and I'll be right at him and I'll be starboard. That won't necessarily work because let's say you're both moving forward. B is tacking, 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 still tacking, and he hasn't finished tacking, so B loses. B gets the penalty because they had not completed their tack. More importantly, even if they were on starboard, let's say they're tacking, tacking, tack completed with like a foot to go on A. A can't avoid, B didn't give time and opportunity, which is one of the most important reasons of any rule. You have to give another boat, even if you have right of way, you have to give them time and opportunity to avoid a collision. Otherwise, it would just be cheap.
Will, is it the main or the
Jib. So in a 420, there's ways you can kind of manipulate that jib rule, which is what umpires and judges typically ask and look for. 420, if you heel over right now and you flatten, your jib's going to pop. It's going to be filled. AKA, you completed your tack. So if you're this boat and you're saying, okay, I got to tack and I got to make it fast, you're going to roll tack and you're going to probably flatten just a hair early, marginally, so now you have right away. You can complete your tack technically a little sooner if you fill your jib. So fill your jib.
That's why we do all the practice roll tacking.
Yep. And if you don't know what roll tacks are, we'll show you. Don't worry. Okay. Rule 14, avoiding contact. And this talks about that time and opportunity thing once again. You're going to keep hearing that. Rule 14 says, a boat shall avoid contact with another boat if reasonably possible. How you got to look at this is, if there's a collision that's totally imminent, the other boat doesn't see you at all, and you're still starboard boat, you can be starboard boat. If you don't avoid a port boat that doesn't see you and you slam into each other and you cause damage, the starboard boat is actually in the wrong, even though they have right away because they're on starboard. They judge this rule. You can get thrown out of races for this if there's damage. So, like I said, this is a situation that I've gotten in trouble for at North Americans, and I almost got thrown out of a race, but I knew I was in the right, but we'll talk about what went right and what went wrong. Okay, so We're going to ask you experts, because you laughed. So here's the windward mark. That's the mark at the top of the course. And we're flying spinnakers, which is a sail used downwind in 420s. We don't use them in college. So I'm A, here's B. He rounds the mark ahead of me. He puts his kite up. Really windy, like 20-mile-an-hour gust hits. His kite fills, my kite fills.
You're B?
Yeah, or I'm A. So now the mark's up top here, and he flips. And he flips at a point where I'm right there. I'm A. I hit the bottom of his boat with my bow. My shroud catches his rudder, $700 piece of work, and breaks it. So my shroud snapped his rudder off. So B is pretty angry at this point, and he's yelling at me to do my turns. And I'm like, I did not have time to avoid. That was my impression. So we'll go back to the point of contact, or I'll replay it for you experts one more time. Notice there's half a boat, or 2/3 of a boat length space, and we're moving 10 miles an hour. Hit. Okay. Who wants to be the expert? Jason.
I'm gonna go with.
Who's the penalty on?
Your ruling. Whatever happened, you were in the right.
I like that ruling. All right, Kendall, what do you think?
I mean, based on your, you didn't have time to avoid.
Okay, what do you think?
It depends on what you and your crew were doing in the boat, whether you were doing everything possible to avoid contact, which for those, it may be turning the rudder, it may also be sail trim, stuff like that. There's a lot of nuance.
A good point that Chris made me think of just now is the excuse, I didn't see them, does not work. You don't try. All right, end of the day, this kid protests me. It was Annapolis Yacht Club, and it was really awkward, like going to the protest room, the kid's like talking shit behind my back, like outside. He comes out, his whole posse's like, oh yeah, I'm getting him thrown out. Now, if he throws me out of the race, because I broke his rudder, he couldn't sail the rest of the day, so you would technically get his results replaced. But I did not have time to avoid, and they ruled that, and I was fine. I was exonerated. So I did not have time and opportunity. While what he was saying, I violated Rule 14, avoiding contact. If I saw it, I had to avoid, but I tried, and we were too close. So time and opportunity. If you don't have time, it's on the other guy.
Was the 2/3 boat length and speed relevant? Is there a specific rule?
Totally. All those, whenever you talk about a rule like time and opportunity or avoiding contact, it all comes down to exact wind conditions and how fast you're going and what sails you have up. Now, for me, I was really lucky that there was an on-the-water umpire, and they didn't tell either of us during a protest hearing that saw all this and was like, okay, did not have time, puff just hit. So wind is totally relevant to answer your question. All right.
Well, can I just make one?
Yeah, and once again, you can't be penalized under Rule 14 technically unless there's damage. Now, define damage. Tiny little scratch. They could technically do that, but they don't. Usually it's a chunk out of fiberglass or some noticeable wear on the boat. Still look if like you broke a rub rail, stuff like that. And the umpires will check that.
So guys, Will made a good point that it's really important when you're in these situations, both as a skipper and a crew, to work together to, if you get involved in a protest or you think you're in kind of a sketchy situation, make sure that you look around and see if there's somebody that saw what happened. Try and be as diligent as you can, remembering, you know, what was actually going on, what your emotions were, because if you do get into the protest room, it's the best thing that you can do for yourself is be confident and have as much information as possible. And particularly having a witness is helpful.
So what we're talking about with the protest room, guys, and this happens in college sailing too. Basically, let's say Tom hit me, and I was sailing on starboard, and he was on port, and Tom didn't do his circle. Now, I yell, protest, sail number. And I mean yell. Like, you need to make sure that at least Tom and 2 other boats hear it. And I would not repeat it more than once or twice. Just you need to make it known that you said protest sail number. After that, you get to shore and you fill out a form that the race committee gives you. Oh, no, step 2. Step 2. Tell the race committee, I am protesting boat 8. And it's also very helpful that you find someone and think of who was near you on the water that saw it. Because if you have a witness, you're going to end up, they're going to come into this courtroom style thing and they'll give their side of the story. So you get to shore, you fill out your form and you submit it, and then sometime later in the day, they're going to have 3 certified umpires and they're going to sit down, he says his side of the story, you tell your side. The umpires or the judges ask you questions, they bring the witness in, and it's all kind of like an awkward, tense moment because you're wondering, am I going to get thrown out or is the other guy? And you can't throw out a DSQ. So if you get disqualified, you're screwing your results majorly. That's why it's worth it to just spin if you think you're wrong. All right. Mark room. We're just going to touch a little on this because we're pretty long on time right now. And this is probably one of the most complicated things that I can teach you. It's okay though, because you have lots of time to figure this out. So, mark room. And first of all, why do we have mark rules? When we're sailing downwind, 2 boats are going to come up on a mark and they're both going to be yelling at each other, and if we didn't have rules, we would just hit each other and sail off into oblivion in fights. So we need rules to tell us who has right of way between A and B right now when they're going towards a mark downwind. And that's what these rules are going to tell us. So step number 1 to understanding what mark room is. Oh, and mark room is, by definition, when B says, hey, A, you got to let me around this mark. So A has to sail off a little so B can squeeze in between them to get around a mark. So, first of all, we're sailing downwind. We're just going to talk about downwind right now. So here's your lured mark. And what we're going to keep talking about is this imaginary 3 boat length circle. So, let's say you're sailing a 60-footer and a 10-footer. Jason, what do you think? What's the 3 boat length circle? 60-footer and a 10-footer? I don't know. 180. It goes by the bigger boat. Now, in a 420, so a 420 is 4.2 meters long, so it's 12.6 meters. Convert that to feet, it's 30-something feet. It's kind of hard to judge on the water, though, and I'm going to show you guys some drills so you can tell when you enter this 3 boat length circle, which is, if you have tip to tail, 3 boats. Wow, those got worse. All right. Now we're not going to worry about port and starboard right now because those rules basically turn off when you enter a circle. Now, what this basically says is if you have 2 boats that enter a mark, once again, wind's coming from there, and you're rounding this way. This is the inside boat, this is the outside boat. Rule 18, in a nutshell, says that the inside boat is entitled to room. AKA, this boat can't just sail straight around it and not let this boat through. Because if you did that, this boat wouldn't be able to round the mark. Okay? So Rule 18 says that inside boat gets right away, and they are entitled to mark room. This is especially important in college-style racing when we often come into marks stacked, and I mean stacked. You can get 4 or 5 boats like that next to each other. So you need to be aware of what's going on, because boat 1 needs to tell boat 2, I need room. 2 needs to tell boat 3, I need room. 3 needs to tell boat 4, I need room. So if you're boat 1 and you try and play this game when you're all like right here and here, 1, that's right here, is never going to get around that mark. There's no way that all these boats can instantly move. So when you're inside boat, you need to be vocal and you need to be aware of what's going on. AKA, I have mark room, let me in. Yeah, so mark room like this applies because all these boats entered overlapped. All right. The last note I'm going to tell you of all this.
Question.
Yeah, go.
If there's no overlap when you enter the circle, but you overlap once you're in the circle.
Okay. Here, come up and show me. It'll just be easier than drawing.
This is a really important question, by the way.
So right now, guys, we're going to have to scale things back because my boats are a little big. So just remember that the wind is coming from the top.
Okay, so if there's no overlap and you enter the circle, but then boat B overlaps, who has right of way?
So this boat entered clear ahead.
Yes.
So this is a very good question. Let's say that right here is the 3 boat length circle. Boat A enters clear ahead. Boat B catches a puff of wind and ends up in here. Now the ruling is, and what you need to go back to is, were they overlapped when they entered the 3 boat length circle?
So it's when you
No.
enter the circle?
Right. It's all about when you enter the circle. So all you need to say is, A, got into the 3 boat length circle that's right here, ahead, there's no overlap. B tried to get in here. B yells, give me mark room. A yells, hell no. No room. We were not overlapped when we entered the circle. Yeah.
When is that like cutoff time? Is it when the bow of A crosses the circle, or is it when A is fully in the circle?
Good question. This goes back, I said there's 4-ish appendices in the rules of sailing. It defines this, and that is any working part of the boat, when it enters the circle, is defined as entering the zone. So that can be a spinnaker. So if you have your spinnaker 20 feet out in front of the boat, if that very front cloth crosses that line, you're in. And what I'm talking about with that is, let's say you luff your jib though. Okay, let's say we're really close right here, and B says, "Oh, I'm going to try this." Luffs his jib. So now his jib is luffing out in front right here. That appendice rule says B is not overlapped because their jib is not in normal position. It's intentional. Does not work. Same thing works when you're ever crossing a finish line. It's that very front edge of the boat as it crosses, or your spinnaker. A bailer, if you throw your bailer, that it doesn't work. Yeah, it's extend your bowsprit. That doesn't work. If you have one on a 420, good job.
All right, what happens if B is overlapped and then B jives when he's within the circle?
You want to show me?
I mean, I can show you.
Hold on.
I mean, we don't have any sails, so I can't really
Yeah.
show you.
Just make it out.
Say they're coming in, right?
Yep.
And B has overlap, but then B jives.
So they entered on port.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're on port. Well, let's say A's on starboard, right?
Yep.
And B's on port. And B comes in, has overlap, but then jibes in.
Cool. I have an easy way to answer this, and it's go back to when you entered the zone. Were you overlapped? No. So, A has right away. A owns the zone, you call it. So, if a boat enters, when we talk about it like right here, I'm going to define own the zone, because this is really important.
That's only if A is on starboard when it enters, right?
What is,
If it enters on port, but they're on different tacks, it wouldn't.